Hello, Pack. Tonight's story begins at an altar. Caelum of Ironhold had stood at that altar for 20 minutes before she walked through the wrong door. He had a bride. He had a council. He had a hall full of witnesses who had waited 3 years for their Alpha King to finally bind himself to someone, anyone, and stop walking the fortress corridors alone at night like a man looking for a room he couldn't name. He had all of that. And then Wren came through the side door with a satchel of manuscripts wrapped in oilcloth, looking for the archivist's annex, and the hall went silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that falls when something large and old and inevitable has just stepped into the room wearing a traveling cloak and mud on her boots. She had no idea what she'd walked into. Let's begin. The morning of the ceremony, Ironhold Keep smelled of pine resin and cold stone and the particular nervous energy of a fortress that had been cleaned too thoroughly. Every torch had been replaced. Every banner had been rehung. The great hall's long tables had been pushed to the walls to make room for the aisle, and someone had strewn white ash flowers across the flagstones in a path from the main doors to the stone dais at the far end, where the binding altar stood beneath a window that looked out over the frozen marshes. Caelum stood at the altar in his formal grays, and he looked exactly like a man fulfilling an obligation. He was tall in the way that Ironhold's kings tended to be tall, built for cold weather, for long silences, for standing in doorways and making decisions that cost something. His eyes were the gray of deep water before a storm, and they had been fixed, for the last several minutes, on a point approximately 2 feet above the head of his intended, which was either a sign of great composure or a sign of something else entirely. His council had decided it was composure. His wolves, stationed along the hall's edges, were less certain. They'd been restless all morning, small shifts, weight redistributed, ears that would have pricked if they'd been in fur. His intended was Lady Mairead of Greyfall, and she was everything his council had asked for. Politically aligned, well-connected, composed in the particular way that noble women in contested territories learn to be composed, like a surface over deep water, smooth and telling you nothing about the depth. She stood across the altar from him with her hands folded and her eyes forward and the ghost of a practiced smile on her face, and she was not, Caelum thought, a woman who was happy. She was a woman who had decided to be strategic, which was not the same thing, and which he understood completely because he had made the same decision. The hall held 60 witnesses, council members, ranking wolves, representatives from 3 allied packs. They had been waiting for this for years. He knew it. He had given them this. The ceremony, the altar, the white ash flowers, because it was what Ironhold needed, and he had run out of reasons to refuse. He was 4 words from the binding vow when the side door opened. It was the archivist's entrance. A narrow door in the east wall that connected the hall to the corridor leading to the manuscript annex used by staff and scholars and no one who had any business being in the great hall on a binding day. It should have been locked. Someone had forgotten. She came through it sideways, the way you come through a door when you're carrying something large and don't want to hit the frame. A leather satchel over one shoulder, a stack of oilcloth-wrapped manuscripts tucked under the other arm, her attention on her footing because the threshold was uneven and she'd clearly nearly tripped. She had a traveling cloak that had seen weather, boots that had seen more, and the look of someone who had been on the road for 3 days and was very much focused on finding the room she'd been hired to work in. She looked up. She saw 60 people looking back at her. She stopped. The silence came a half-second later, spreading outward from her like a stone dropped in still water. It moved through the wolves first. The one station nearest the east wall went still with a completeness that wasn't discipline. That was something older and more involuntary than discipline. Then the next row. Then the next. The council members, who were not wolves and should not have been affected, found themselves suddenly very quiet without knowing why. Lady Moret's practiced composure flickered. Her eyes moved to the woman in the doorway. Caelum felt it before he turned. Something pulled, low and certain, in the center of his chest. Not pain. The opposite of pain. The particular sensation of a thing that had been absent for so long, you'd stopped noticing the absence. Suddenly and completely present. He turned. She was looking at the hall with the expression of someone doing rapid and unflattering arithmetic. 60 witnesses. Altar. Flowers on the floor. The Alpha King in formal grays staring at her. "I," she said, "have the wrong room." No one answered her. The silence held. One of the wolves near the east wall, a senior tracker named Baron, who had served Ironhold for 11 years and was not given to displays, lowered his head. Then the wolf beside him. Then, in a slow and unstoppable ripple that moved from the east wall to the dais, every wolf in the hall bowed. Wren watched this happen with the expression of someone who had just been handed a problem significantly larger than the one they'd arrived with. She looked at the bowing wolves. She looked at the altar. She looked at Caelum, who was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read and couldn't look away from. "I'm very sorry," she said, to the room in general. "I'll just—" She took one step backward toward the door. Her foot caught the uneven threshold. The manuscripts went one direction. The satchel went another. She caught herself on the door frame, barely, and stood there for a moment with her hands gripping old stone and her dignity somewhere on the floor with the oilcloth parcels. No one moved to help her, not because they were unkind, but because no one in that hall had any idea what the correct response was to what had just happened. Caelum stepped down from the dais. Lady Moret watched him go. He crossed the hall in the silence, reached the doorway, and crouched to collect the nearest manuscript. He held it out to her without speaking. She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. She was looking at him with the careful attention of someone filing something away, without knowing yet what category it belonged to. "The archivist's annex," he said, "is the second door on the left. Not this one." "I see that now," she said. He stood. She stood. They were close enough that she could see the exact shade of his eyes, and she filed that away too, the way she filed everything, without comment, without conclusion, just held. "Caelum," said his first counselor from the dais, with the particular careful enunciation of a man who was very good at managing crises and was currently managing one. Caelum turned. He looked at the altar. He looked at Lady Moret, who had not moved, whose composed expression had returned, who was watching him with the eyes of someone who had just understood something she hadn't been told. He said, "We'll need to postpone." The hall did not go quiet again. The hall erupted. She left during the eruption, which was sensible. He heard the side door close behind her. He stood at the altar and let his counsel shout, and thought about the particular sensation in his chest, which had not diminished when she left, which had, if anything, sharpened into something that felt uncomfortably like direction. On the second day, she was in the archivist's annex. He knew because he could feel the general direction of her the way you feel a fire in a cold room. Not heat exactly, more the awareness of heat, the knowledge that warmth existed and had a location. He found this profoundly inconvenient. He had a fortress to run, a council to manage, a binding ceremony that had been disrupted in front of 60 witnesses and now required either explanation or rescheduling, and a mate bond that had apparently decided to activate during his own vow ceremony, which was the kind of timing that suggested the universe had a sense of humor he did not appreciate. He went to the annex on the second evening, after the council meeting, because he needed to understand the scope of the problem. She was at the long work table, surrounded by manuscripts, with a lamp pulled close and her hair tied back and the focused stillness of someone who had been working for hours and had stopped noticing the world around her. The manuscripts were old, Ironhold's border treaty records, from the look of the binding, some of them 3 generations back. She had 3 open in front of her and was making notes in a small book with the careful handwriting of someone who understood that the original was irreplaceable. She heard him at the door and looked up. "Alpha King," she said, in the tone of someone who had prepared for this. "You're the translator they sent from Caldermere," he said. "Archivist," she said. "Translator is secondary. I'm here for the border genealogies. Your council contracted for 6 weeks. I know what my council contracted for. Then you know I'm not going anywhere." She said it without challenge, just fact, and returned her attention to the manuscript in front of her. "I'm sorry about the ceremony. I genuinely had the wrong door." "I know. And whatever happened in there—" She paused, chose her words with the care of someone who had been thinking about this for a day and a half. "I don't know what that was, but I'm not here for it. I'm here for the genealogies." He looked at her for a long moment. She was not looking at him. She was reading, or performing reading, with the concentration of someone who had decided that work was the appropriate response to an impossible situation, which was, he thought, a reasonable decision. "The second shelf on the left," he said, "the records from before my grandfather's reign. The bindings are fragile. Don't force them." She looked up. Something shifted in her expression. "Not much, just a fraction." "You've read them." "Some." "The boundary markers in the 1340 treaty are wrong," she said. "Someone altered them. The original line was 3 miles east of where the current maps show." He was quiet for a moment. "I know," he said. "That's why I hired a translator." She looked at him steadily. Then she nodded once and went back to her work, and he stood in the doorway for a moment longer before he left. He did not knock when he came back the following evening. She did not look surprised that he hadn't. On the 4th day, his council found him. They came in a delegation, which meant it was serious, and they came to his study rather than summoning him to the council chamber, which meant they were being careful. His first counselor, Aldrich, led them. A narrow man with careful hands and the smooth voice of someone who had spent 40 years navigating pack politics without ever quite taking a side. "The Greyfall delegation is asking for a response," Aldrich said. "Lady Moret's family requires an explanation for the postponement. Tell them the ceremony has been delayed pending a review of the binding terms. That's not an explanation they'll accept indefinitely. It's the one I'm giving them." Aldrich set his hands flat on the desk in the particular way he had of indicating that he was about to say something he had rehearsed. "The pack has seen what happened in the hall. The wolves are talking. There are questions about the archivist." Caelum looked at him. "What kind of questions?" "Whether she's a complication, whether she should be reassigned, whether the contract with Caldermere might be—" "The contract stands," Caelum said, flat and final, no explanation offered. Aldrich held his gaze for a moment. "The Greyfall alliance is 3 years in the making." "I'm aware. And the bond you're describing?" "I haven't described anything." The room went very quiet. Aldrich looked at the other council members. One of them, a woman named Petra, who handled territorial law, said carefully, "An unnamed bond decays. If there is a bond, and it goes unnamed, it becomes a wound. For both parties." Caelum said nothing. "She may not know," Petra said. "If she's not a wolf—" "She knows something happened," he said. "She's choosing not to name it." "Then you're both choosing not to name it." He didn't answer. Petra looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone who had seen this before and knew how it ended. 2 weeks, Aldrich said. "The Greyfall delegation will wait 2 weeks. After that, we will need a decision." They left. Caelum sat at his desk and looked at the wall and thought about the particular sensation in his chest, which had been with him for 4 days now and which had not for a single hour, diminished. On the 6th day, she found the altered record. He knew because she came to his study for the first time without announcement and knocked once before opening the door in the way of someone who had decided that the situation warranted the intrusion. She was carrying a manuscript in her small notebook and the expression of someone who had found something significant and was not entirely sure what to do with it. "The 1340 boundary alteration," she said. "It's not the only one. There are 4 others. Different hands, different decades, but the same intent. Someone has been systematically moving Ironhold's eastern border on paper." He set down what he was reading. "Show me." She spread the manuscripts on his desk and walked him through it. 4 treaties, 4 alterations, each one subtle enough to miss individually, devastating collectively. She had marked each discrepancy in her notebook with the precise notation of someone who understood that the evidence needed to be irrefutable before it was presented. He followed her through it without speaking, and when she finished, he sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "This is why the Eastern Pack has been pushing the border claims," he said. "The documents they're citing would support their position. The documents they don't know exist would destroy it. You'll need to compile a formal record." "I know." She gathered the manuscripts with the careful efficiency he'd been watching for 6 days. "I'll have it done in a week." "Wren." She stopped. It was the first time he'd used her name. She was very still for a moment, not looking at him, and then she turned. "The bond," he said. "I know you feel it." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wind moved against the stone of the keep, and a torch in the corridor guttered and caught. "I feel something," she said finally. "I don't know what to call it. I do. I know you do." She looked at him steadily. "You were standing at an altar." "I was." "With someone else." "I was. And now your council wants a decision in 2 weeks." She said it without accusation, just the plain shape of the situation, and he found that harder to sit with than anger would have been. "I'm not asking you to name anything. I'm here for the genealogies." She left. He sat at his desk for a long time after, with the manuscripts and her notebook's careful handwriting and the direction of her in his chest pointing steadily toward the corridor she'd walked down. On the 8th day, the Greyfall delegation came to dinner. It was a political meal, the kind where the food is secondary to the positioning, where every placement at the table is a statement and every conversation is a negotiation wearing the clothes of pleasantry. Lady Merritt was there, composed and careful, and watching everything. Her father sat at Caelum's left and talked about the eastern border disputes with the smooth confidence of a man who didn't know yet that the documents supporting his position were fraudulent. Wren was not at the dinner. She ate in the annex when she was working late, which she had been doing every night for a week. He was aware of the direction of her the entire meal. Halfway through the 3rd course, Lady Merritt said quietly, to no one in particular, "The archivist seems to be working very long hours." The table went slightly still. "The genealogies are complex," Caelum said. "I'm sure they are." Lady Merritt's voice was perfectly even. "She was at the altar ceremony." "She had the wrong door." "Yes." A pause. The wolves bowed to her. No one at the table said anything. The fire in the great hearth cracked and settled. Marit's father looked at Caelum with an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral. "Lady Merritt," Caelum said, and his voice was the voice he used when he was about to say something that cost him. "You deserve a direct conversation, not a dinner table." She looked at him. For the first time since he'd met her, the composed surface slipped, and underneath it was not anger, but something quieter and more dignified. The expression of a woman who had already understood and was waiting for the man in front of her to catch up. "I know," she said. I've known since the 8th step." He held her gaze. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said. "Be honest. That's all I've ever asked of you." It was, he thought, the most genuine exchange they'd ever had. On the 10th day, his counsel forced the issue. They convened a formal session and put it on the record. The bond had been witnessed by 60 members of the pack. An unnamed bond between an Alpha King and an unclaimed Omega was a political liability. The Greyfall Alliance required a response. The archivist's contract could be terminated for cause if the Alpha King wished to proceed with the original binding. Wren was not present. She was in the annex. Caelum sat at the head of the council table and listened to all of it with the stillness of something that had been bracing for a long time and had finally decided to stop. When Aldrich finished, Caelum said, "Bring her." Aldrich blinked. "To the council chamber?" "Yes." There was a pause while someone went to the annex. The council chamber was very quiet. Petra, the territorial law specialist, was looking at her hands. Wren came in with her notebook and the expression of someone who had been pulled from important work and was reserving judgment on whether the interruption was justified. She looked at the council table, at the formal arrangement of it, at Caelum at the head of it, and she understood immediately what kind of meeting this was. She sat in the chair they indicated, set her notebook on the table, and folded her hands. Aldrich explained the situation with the careful enunciation of a man who was being very precise about the law. The bond, the witnesses, the requirement that an unnamed bond between an Alpha King and an Omega be formally addressed within a defined period. The options available to the Alpha King. Wren listened without expression. When he finished, she said, "What are my options?" Aldrich paused. He looked at Caelum. Caelum looked at Wren. "The contract can be terminated," Aldrich said carefully. "You would be compensated for work completed and escorted to the border. Or," another pause, "or the bond is named, formally, before witnesses." Wren was quiet for a moment. She looked at Caelum. "And what does he want?" The council very carefully did not look at their Alpha King. Caelum said, "I want to know what you want." She looked at him steadily. "That's not an answer." "No," he said, "it's not." The silence stretched. "I want to finish the genealogies," she said. "I want the eastern border records compiled correctly. I want the fraudulent treaties documented so that Ironhold's claim is unimpeachable." She paused. "Those things need to happen regardless of what either of us decides about the other thing." "Agreed," he said. "Then let me finish my work." She stood. "After that, we can talk about the other thing." She picked up her notebook and left. The council sat in silence for a moment. Petra said very quietly, "I like her." He found her that night in the corridor outside the annex, sitting on the stone floor with her back against the wall and her knees drawn up and her notebook open on her legs, writing by the light of a single torch. She looked up when she heard him. "You didn't have to fight for me in there," she said. "I could have handled the council." "I know," he said. He sat down on the floor beside her, which was not a thing Alpha Kings generally did in corridors, and she looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating. "I didn't do it because you couldn't handle it." "Why then?" He was quiet for a moment. The torch threw warm light across the stone, and somewhere in the keep a wolf was moving, paws on flagstone, the particular soft rhythm of a night patrol. "My last mate," he said. "She left 3 years ago. I hadn't named the bond correctly. I'd held it at a distance because I thought distance was management. I thought if I didn't name it, it would stay controllable." He paused. It didn't. She felt the distance, and she read it as rejection, and by the time I understood what I'd done, she was already gone. Wren was very still. "I have been careful since then," he said. "Very careful. Aldrich found me Maret because I told him to find me someone appropriate, and appropriate felt like the right word. And I stood at that altar because appropriate was something I could deliver without risking anything I wasn't willing to lose again. He looked at his hands. And then you came through the wrong door. She was quiet for a long time. The torch guttered. She reached up and adjusted it with the automatic efficiency of someone who had been working in this corridor long enough to know its habits. I felt it too, she said. When the wolves bowed, I didn't know what it was. I thought it was something I'd walked into, something about the ceremony, some pack custom I didn't understand. She paused, but it didn't go away when I left the hall. No. It's been 10 days and it hasn't gone away. No. She looked at him. What happens if it goes unnamed? It decays, he said, slowly. Both of us feel it going. He met her eyes. Petra described it as going deaf in a full room. Wren held his gaze. Then she looked back at her notebook, and she was quiet for a long time. And he waited, because this was the kind of silence that needed to run its length. I'm not a political alliance, she said finally. I'm not from a noble family. I'm an archivist from a traveling practice, and I have a contract with your council for 6 weeks, and I came here for the genealogies. I know. If you name this bond, your council is going to have opinions. They already have opinions. They'll have more. I'll manage them. I'm not asking you to protect me from your council. I know that too. He looked at her steadily. I'm asking you to let me name it. Not because the council requires it, not because the bond will decay, because I have been careful for 3 years, and careful has cost me every warm thing in this keep, and you came through the wrong door, and the wolves bowed, and I felt something I'd stopped believing I was going to feel again. He paused. I'd like to say it out loud, if you'll let me. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, You should know that I'm going to finish the genealogies. I know. And when I find something else wrong with the treaty records, I'm going to tell you, and you're going to have to deal with it. I expect nothing less. And I don't bow, she said, to anyone. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. The ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile. Close enough. I know, he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she closed her notebook. All right, she said. Say it out loud. The ceremony was held in the courtyard on the 12th day because Wren had said she didn't want the great hall and its altar and its ash flowers, and Caelum had said she could have whatever she wanted. And what she wanted was open sky and the pack gathered without the formal architecture of ceremony pressing down on everyone. It was cold. The frost was still on the stone at mid-morning, and the wolf's breath made small clouds in the air. And someone had built a fire in the center of the courtyard that was doing its best against the temperature. The pack was there. All of them. The council, the wolves, the household staff who had been watching this unfold for 12 days with the focused attention of people who understood they were witnessing something significant. Aldrich stood to one side with the expression of a man who had managed many crises and was cautiously optimistic about this one. Petra stood beside him and looked for the first time in the proceedings genuinely pleased. Wren stood in the center of the courtyard in her traveling cloak, which she had not exchanged for anything more ceremonial because she was an archivist, and this was who she was. And Caelum stood across from her and looked at her with the expression of a man who had finally stopped bracing. He said the words. The formal ones first, because the law required them, flat and final as they always were when he spoke, each word set down with the care of something that had been picked up and examined before being placed. And then, when the formal words were done, he said the other ones. The ones that weren't required, the ones he'd been holding at a distance for 3 years, the ones that cost something. He said, I see you, not what you walked into, not what the wolves did when you came through the door. You, The person who found 4 fraudulent treaties in 6 days and came to my study without announcement because the work mattered. The person who sat on the corridor floor and told me she wasn't asking for protection. He paused. I name this bond because I choose to, because you are the clearest thing in this keep, and I have been living in fog for 3 years, and I would like to stop. The courtyard was very quiet. Wren looked at him. Then she said, I name it too, because the work is good here, and the records need someone who cares about them, and because you sat on the corridor floor, which I didn't expect, and because the bond has been pointing me in your direction for 12 days, and I've decided to stop pretending I don't notice. She paused. Also, she said, your council is going to need someone who can read the old law manuscripts, and apparently that's me, so you're stuck with me anyway. Something in the courtyard shifted, not the silence breaking exactly, more the silence changing quality, from held breath to released breath, from waiting to arrived. The wolves gathered along the courtyard walls went very still, and then the ripple moved through them again. The same ripple that had moved through the great hall 12 days ago, the same bowing, from the walls inward, until every wolf in the courtyard had lowered its head. Caelum looked at her across the fire. She was looking at the wolves with the expression she'd had in the great hall, the rapid arithmetic, the recalibrating. And then she looked back at him, and something in her face settled. Still don't bow, she said. I know, he said. He crossed the distance between them and held out his hand, open, palm up, not commanding, not claiming, just offered. And she looked at it for a moment with the stillness of something that had finally stopped bracing, and then she put her hand in his. The fire cracked and threw light across the frost-covered stone. Aldrich made a note in his record book. Petra quietly exhaled. Baron, the senior tracker who had been the first wolf to bow in the great hall 12 days ago, lifted his head and looked at the two of them standing by the fire with the expression of a wolf who had known something was coming and was satisfied to have been right. 3 weeks later, the eastern border claim was formally challenged in the Territorial Council using Wren's compiled record of the fraudulent treaties. The opposing pact's position collapsed in the first session. Ironhold's eastern boundary was restored to its correct line for the first time in 80 years. Wren was in the council chamber for the presentation, sitting at the side table with her notebooks and her careful handwriting, and the composed attention of someone who had done the work and was watching it land. When the session ended and the chamber cleared, Caelum found her still at the side table, making final notes. The boundary is restored, he said. I know. I was there. The council wants to know if you'll stay beyond the 6-week contract. She didn't look up. What does the Alpha King want? The Alpha King, he said, would like his mate to stay. The Alpha King would also like his archivist to stay because the 1,280 genealogies are still incomplete, and someone altered 3 of the northern boundary records in ways that are going to require at least another month to document properly. She looked up. 2 months, she said. The northern records are worse than the eastern ones. 2 months, he agreed. She looked at him with the expression she'd had in the corridor. The one that was still filing things away, still cataloging, still precise, and underneath it, something warmer, the particular warmth of a person who had stopped expecting warmth and was learning to let it in without flinching. The second shelf on the left, she said. The ones with the fragile bindings. Don't force them. I never do. She went back to her notes. He sat down across from her at the side table, which was not a thing Alpha Kings generally did in council chambers, and pulled the nearest manuscript toward him, and they worked in the firelight while the frost settled on the courtyard stones outside, and the wolves moved on their evening patrol. And Ironhold Keep held them both in its old cold walls like something it had been waiting a long time to keep. That's where we leave them. Now here's what I want to know. Caelum had the wrong door locked. Someone forgot. Do you think that was an accident? If you've ever been in the right place at exactly the wrong moment that turned out to be the right moment, drop it in the comments. This pack has stories, and I want to hear them. And if someone you know is waiting for their wrong door, share this with them. Consider it a gift. I'll see you in the next one.